The A-10 Warthog is ugly, tough, lethal, and fairly flexible. It has been among the most popular and acclaimed military aircraft for years, and its impressive record is widely commended among military enthusiasts. However, this video focuses on discovering the Warthog's natural flaws hidden under its glory. The crash that occurred during its first appearance at the Paris Air Show in 1977 is one of the major events in the history of the A-10 that is often glossed over. The U.S. military arranged two whifferdille maneuvers in the show to show off its low-level, low-speed maneuverability. The first whifferdille was pulled up to a low altitude, and the A-10 was already stalled by the time of the second. Although Fairchild's chief test pilot banged the throttles to military power and pulled up hard on the stick, there was not enough altitude to change out of the dive in time. The plane dragged across a taxiway at the approach end of the runway, the horizontal tail snapped off and whirled up, way into the air with its vertical stabilizers, rotating around its lateral axis. Then the plane bellied into the ground in a burst of flame and clouds of dirt. The Warthog's first crash occurred at such a famous aviation event, and the accident was one of the reasons for the A-10's dismal export performance. The more significant reason, however, was that the A-10 had little attraction to other NATO member countries. Low-speed attack aircraft are highly effective in low-intensity conflict and asymmetric warfare. However, the NATO member countries determined that Warsaw Pact armored forces would never advance without anti-air weapon protection, and that NATO air forces could not ensure complete suppression of Warsaw Pact air forces and air defenses. Once the war starts, there may be no chance for the A-10 to operate safely in the European skies. This led to NATO member countries wanting the A-10 except for the USAF, which needed to help NATO ground forces stand up to the Warsaw Pact's torrent of tanks. Those countries that declined the A-10 preferred to buy multi-role fighter aircraft such as F-16 and the Dassault Rafale. As for the wildly touted anti-tank wonder, the General Electric GAU-8 Avenger, a 30mm hydraulically driven 7-barrel Gatling-style autocannon, was not really the ideal anti-tank weapon. The first problem is the accuracy of the Avenger. Achieving an acceptable spread accuracy is only possible by flying to a very close range. It is only possible to spread a large area like splashing water and pray some bullets can hit the target. Another factor is that the gun's recoil is strong enough that any off-centerline positioning of the firing barrel would result in yaw that could cause the firing pattern to be scattershot rather than fire hose. The GAU-8 accuracy, when installed in the A-10, is rated at 5 mil, 80%, meaning that 80% of rounds fired will hit within a cone with an angle of 5 milliradians. This equates to a 12 meters diameter circle at the weapon's design range of 1,200 meters. In a series of U.S. Air Force live-fire tests, the A-10 began firing at targets at a distance of about 800 to 1,300 meters, averaging about 28% hits at such distances, which is less accurate than the data provided by the manufacturer. This is the result obtained without under attack by enemy anti-aircraft fire. In actual combat, entering this distance may even hit the Warthog with anti-aircraft machine guns, not to mention anti-aircraft guns and anti-aircraft missiles. The PGU-14/B depleted uranium armor-piercing round, the most anti-tank bullet the GAU-8 fires. The 30mm rounds contain a subcaliber high-density penetrator of depleted uranium. Each projectile contains approximately 4,650 grains of extruded depleted uranium, alloyed with 0.75 weight% titanium. The projectile is encased in a 0.8 thick aluminum shell as the final depleted uranium round. It can penetrate 55 mm of armor at 1,220 meters and 75 mm at 300 meters. However, those penetration figures are for steel. Very rapidly after the introduction of the A-10, the Soviet Union started outfitting all of its main battle tanks with composite armor and additional external armor. Take the result from one of the tests as a case. 9 A-10s attacked a simulated Soviet tank company firing at the tank's side armor from an average distance of 895 meters, firing 595 rounds. Of these, only 103 hit the tank directly and only 17 of the total hits penetrated. The damage effect of the attack was that, except for one tank that was not hit at all other tanks attacked were damaged to varying levels, but no tank was destroyed. So at best, if you pepper a tank with a full magazine of PGU-14/B fired from a GAU-8, you're probably hoping to break its track, poke a hole in an external fuel tank, or puncture its main gun, not destroy it. It should be noted that if shooting the frontal armor of a tank, then the A-10 would not be able to penetrate a tank similar to T-62, even if it shoots at a rifle shooting distance. In order to kill a T-62, the A-10 had to approach it from very specific directions, at very specific angles of attack. The Soviets knew this, too. In addition, the Avenger is not a stable weapon, many variables can affect the test results, and the test data fluctuates wildly. However, it is clear that the USAF intended for the A-10 to use something other than the Avenger as the primary means to accomplish anti-tank missions. They found that while it was a good idea to use the Avenger against the plenty of lightly armored vehicles or soft targets on the battlefield, hitting tanks were not. The A-10, optimized for low altitude and low airspeed attack missions, is better suited to loitering the front lines to provide close air support to friendly ground troops than high-speed aircraft. The anti-tank weapons equipped by the A-10 are AGM-65 Maverick missiles and unguided, dumb bombs. The exclusive highlight of the A-10 is the Avenger. Since the Avenger is not a weapon for destroying tanks, missiles and bombs cannot reflect the necessity of the A-10. Other aircraft can also use these weapons well or even better. The U.S. Air Force has been trying for years to replace the A-10 with various aircraft types because of its many shortcomings. However, the ground force and civilians often stigmatize such attempts as collusion with the military-industrial complex regardless of the lives of soldiers. In fact, the Air Force is well aware of the A-10's Achilles heel of low survivability on a complex battlefield and knows its glittering record was not achieved in symmetrical warfare. An aircraft like the F-35 or F-16 may not be as efficient and economical as the A-10. Still, the much higher battlefield survivability ensures more opportunities for firepower output. The only reasons left to maintain the A-10s kept in service are economic factors and the need for low-intensity conflict with asymmetric adversaries. By the way, Russia also kept the Su-25 in service for the same reason the US kept the A-10. Historically, tension has existed between the Army and the Air Force over the relative roles of ground and air power, which is also one of the reasons why the Air Force wants to retire the A-10. The Air Force does not like any aircraft that is slow speed and has limited air combat capability, especially since the main point of continuing to spend money on such aircraft is to meet the needs of the Army. The Air Force's main objective is fighting the enemy's air force and strategic strikes. The F-15's motto of, "Not a pound for air to ground," is related to this. The 1991 Gulf War made the A-10 famous, yet the fame often makes one ignore the exposed problems. The A-10 does not top the list of all coalition aircraft records of ground strikes, nor does it rank first even regarding anti-armor records alone. Compared with rigorous official records, the media and civilians like to confuse the target type when describing the combat performance of the A-10. They intentionally advertised any vehicle target destroyed as a tank, and even regarded the destroyed vehicle as the records of the Avenger, furthering the myth of A-10 effectiveness. The combination of the A-10 and GAU-8 was quickly mythologized as the most powerful anti-tank combination. In fact, most A-10 pilots in the Gulf War usually choose the AGM-65 as their primary anti-tank weapon. Interestingly, the A-10, while not grabbing the top rank in any combat record, was at the deadliest for friendly fire. The rudimentary avionics equipment has somewhat reduced the ability to identify friendly troops from enemy forces and the shooting accuracy and precision. The A-10 is a simple airplane, and until post-production upgrades beginning in 1989, it even lacked an autopilot and radar, just like a World War II fighter. The A-10 has killed more U.S. troops in friendly fire incidents and more Afghan civilians than any other aircraft flown by the U.S. military, according to data declassified and obtained by USA Today. Most importantly, few people mentioned that the A-10 was the U.S. Army's highest combat loss fixed-wing aircraft in the Gulf War. In just over 20 days, 5 A-10s were shot down by Iraqi forces, one was wounded and then forced to land and scrapped, with 2 pilots killed and 3 captured. It is worth noting that, apart from sporadic resistance by the Iraqi Air Force, which was at a disadvantage then, the air threats faced by the coalition aircraft were minimal. The coalition forces had an absolute electronic countermeasures advantage and destroyed many Iraqi air defense units. Even in such a lopsided situation, the A-10 still suffered considerable losses. Anti-aircraft guns, SA-16 shoulder-launched missiles, and SA-9 and SA-13 land-based anti-aircraft systems had scored kills on the A-10, which were opponents the A-10 had been designed to deal with. Obviously, the A-10's armor and other protections did not make it immune to enemy fire in actual combat. While the A-10 made a name for itself in the Gulf War, the Afghanistan and Iraq wars made the A-10 the patron saint of soldiers. Overall, the scale and intensity of opponent resistance in both wars were far lighter than in the Gulf War, and the A-10 dared to strike enemy troops from higher altitudes and at greater dive angles. Yet, there was still one A-10 shot down by an anti-aircraft missile. While the A-10 was certainly not the only weapon used to support ground troops, frontline soldiers loved the A-10 for nothing more than the shocking and exciting sensory effects of the aircraft's prevalent low-altitude, close-range attacks with the Avenger, rockets, or unguided missiles. Due to the limitations of the combat style and battlefield environment, this is the only opportunity for ground troops to visualize air support at close range. Such tactics entirely benefited from the low-threat environment created by the disintegration of enemy military forces soon after the war began. Otherwise, ground forces would have constantly been busy fighting with the enemy for A-10 pilots who had been shot down and parachuted. Numerous frontline soldiers have experienced those wars. Whether they retire to civilian life, continue to advance in the military, or enter government service, the deep impressions of A-10 on the battlefield continue to impact them. Today's massive praise for the A-10 from the U.S. Army, civilians, and the government primarily based on this. It has become the most troublesome obstacle in the U.S. Air Force's attempt to retire the A-10. Ground attack mission for aircraft is always to pull the chestnuts out of the fire. Once the scale and intensity of war are large enough, ground attack aircraft losses would skyrocket. There needs to be more than technological advances to change this essence. The lethality of anti-aircraft weapons is always higher than that of continuously optimized attack aircraft protection. While ground attack aircraft directly bring disasters to enemy troops, they are also doomed to face the high price of being shot down frequently. This is all for today's video. If you like our content, drop a like below, subscribe to our channel, and see you in the next episode.